into a legal system which is divinely inspired for the Kenyan legal system under its own legal theory to apply Islamic law in order to bring in zakat and use it with its Islamic conditions to now finance healthcare. So I'm looking at the nuances between the debates in Islamic law, which is again my chapter 4. And in this particular chapter, I've looked solidly at what is Kenya's legal theory like, what is Kenya's legal system like, and does it allow the Kenyan government to accept zakat with its Islamic conditions. So you will see that I've mainly focused on the Constitution of Kenya. And there is when I talk about legal pluralism, because my argument is, does legal pluralism provide us with a methodology to interpret the Constitution in such a way that we are able to draw from it ideas of looking into external independent legal systems like Islamic law? But there's a problem. Article 8 will tell you the state cannot intervene in religion. It should remain outside religion. But then we have entrenched the Qadi's court. We have entrenched Muslim personal law as part of the Constitution. And this is historical, as you'll have seen, that I have argued in my paper about the historical reasons about why Islamic law has been embedded into the Constitution. But is this enough to allow the Kenyan government to rope in zakat to finance health? So this is basically the ideas I've been having, and I'd love to hear your comments on this, and any feedback would be most welcome. The theory that I'm actually relying on is Abdullahi An-Naim's civic reason. It's helping me to understand that when it comes to bringing in broader claims, plural claims, Islamic law and constitutional law, for us to understand it, keeping aside religion would be to apply civic reasoning. So that's helped me somehow conceptualize my argument. And then later on, I go on to extend this argument further in the next chapter, where I now explore legal pluralism with respect to legal positivism, because the Kenyan constitution is heavily positivist, but then it also has a sociological approach to it. And therefore, I'm now going to apply the civic reasoning together with Brian Tamanaha, who's also, I think, an American scholar, who's conceptualized this new theory called socio-legal positivism to try and bring together Islamic law and the Kenyan constitution for there to be legitimacy in legally using zakat. So I'm going to stop here now, and I'll leave the floor open to the professor. Thank you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Salam Laila, and congratulations, good luck. And I wish I could just simply endorse everything you said. But of course, I take it my function is to try to raise some questions that might help you think through what you are doing. Of course, I'm totally in support of the impulse and the motivation and the understanding that we need to bring so-called Islamic law in, but in a way that should not make it Islamic law. I don't know if that makes sense, because when you make it Islamic law, you make it harder to deal with for the state, especially for the state to deal with it. Whereas if you speak in the realm of culture, ethics, other types of normativities that you might be able to incorporate aspects of Islamic law, but not identified as such. Now, we share a colonial history, actually. Kenya and Sudan were both British colonies, as were most of Africa, actually, at the time. The problem is that Islamic law was introduced in the family law field, or rather kept in the family law field, so-called, as an expediency for colonial administration. So it was kept for the wrong reasons. And building it up as an autonomous sort of jurisprudential system makes it harder to do anything with it. I mean, so it is something that Muslims have to live by, but not for the state to have to interfere or try to moderate the harshness of it in some respects by human rights language and concepts. Because I think that basically, as a matter of history, there was no such thing as Islamic law in the pre-colonial. That Muslim communities lived by a totality of Sharia. Yes, they had Sharia as they understood it, but they lived with it uh, at the communal or intercommunal level. So uh, there was no issue of state interference in Sharia because that would be unacceptable to Muslims. The problem is that what is the source of authority in Sharia? And it is not the state. And therefore, the ulama, the scholars, historically, were the ones who had the authority to debate and to modify or to reinterpret Sharia in some respects. But the state was not authorized to do so from the very beginning. And we have founding scholars like Abu Hanifa and Ibn Hanbal who were whipped and imprisoned, tortured by the state to accept positions in the state, and they refused. So that history, because they were confident that if they were to hold the state positions, that would reflect negatively on their jurisprudence in their own Islamic law way of thinking. So my question, therefore, is you should be cautious about injecting elements of Islam, because it's not up to you to, with all due respect, it's not up to you to decide or to me to decide. So it is not as if I will take, the so-called supermarket model of I just walk the aisles and pick and choose. I'll take this, I will take that, I will read the rest. If you take, you will take it all. If you leave it all. I mean, what we call Sharia. Because why would you, or how would you justify selectivity in this way? To say that I will take this aspect of Sharia because it helps adoption and incorporation of the civil and political, economic and social rights covenant. But that's the limit of where you will go with it. But once you open the door, I don't think that you have a coherent or credible argument to say by what criteria are you going to pick and choose among the doctrines of Sharia. Very, very obvious examples include, for example, issues of adoption and children, questions of authority over children, and how the father has the authority, although he may have nothing to do with the child, except fathering it at some point in the past. So there are many other problems, questions about talaq, questions about polygyny. So there are issues in Sharia which may be open to reinterpretation. I personally believe that to be true, but this is an extremely minority position. And once you go in legitimizing something called Sharia into the modern legal systems, then you will, as I said, find it very difficult to hold the gate, hold the position to say that take this, leave that, and so on. Now, there is actually a project, I don't know if you heard about it, because Kenya was one of the states we studied. It was called, it was about Islamic family law and zakat, or zakat and Islamic family law, which looked at the way zakat was gathered and dispersed by the state or by foundations in 7 or 8 Muslim majority countries, all the way from Indonesia to Egypt and even Britain. And I think that, unfortunately, that project, which was supposed to be published by now, our editor has not followed through with the publication. I'm not giving names, but the point is that it was a project that we worked with for about 3-4 years. And the point simply is, whatever you are suggesting is probably more doable if you establish a foundation for it. A non-state or what they call it, non-governmental organization, which is a charitable corporation or entity that can collect and disperse zakat in a way that is acceptable to Muslims and at the same time free from the sort of state interference that gives us all anxiety about the role of the state and how to control it. So if you think of a foundation that, because as you know, there are 8 categories of beneficiaries of the zakat. And you raised the question about whether non-Muslims can benefit from the zakat. You might think that it should be, but the question is it possible for non-Muslims to benefit from the zakat? The question was not raised early enough in Muslim jurisprudence that we have an authoritative answer to it. So it is whatever you know, or I know, and all of us know at this point, is very recent and speculative about possibilities of opening up the 8 categories of beneficiaries to include non-Muslims. Whereas if this was done by an autonomous corporation outside the state, people will be, although it may start as more conservative, but people will be able to influence its work and its thinking that makes it more supportive and sympathetic to non-Muslims, poor citizens who can benefit from the foundation. So I should watch my time so that I don't take too long. But the point is that probably there are other things, I'm sure. But if you think of the shift in the structure of what you are proposing, because there are several states in which even the Muslim majority states, with Sharia being one of the primary sources of legislation and all of that, and still are struggling to be accepted as a legitimate collector and dispenser of zakat. And Muslim people who are liable to zakat would give the state what it's asking and then still on the side pay their own zakat differently, because they don't trust that what the state collected will count as a religious contribution. As you know, zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So it is a major, not only in terms of resources, but in terms of people's individual sense of piety and fulfillment of religious obligations. So they don't trust the state. And if the state takes the zakat anyway, they will say, okay, take it. But on the side, they will still take out the same amount that they are liable to do. So that it leads to people paying twice in order to satisfy the state and at the same time achieve their religious obligation or fulfill it. Now you may say that this will change, but until it does, until people are willing to trust the state enough to disperse zakat legitimately, of course, I mean, it's a long time that we have been trying to do various types of things with Sharia and the state, and it never worked. So I will just leave it at that, but make another of even more problematic argument that the question of human rights law. You mentioned the treaty as if it is already part of Kenya's constitution, legal system, or can easily be brought into the system in that way. Of course, as a common law system, we know that Kenya, like other African states which were former British colonies, that we have the requirement of incorporation, which is true about the US too. So the US, we tend to forget, was a British colony as well. And the English common law they kept is an English common law that requires things which they are still now struggling with in some respects, but not daring to throw it overboard. So the point I'm saying is that when you come to incorporation of an international human rights treaty into Kenyan domestic law, you are changing the nature of what you are incorporating. Because it is no longer human rights law as such. It's human rights law as incorporated by the state into the domestic legal system. And that's a paradox, to expect the state to have the competence to incorporate human rights law into the system of the country, which entails, to begin with, an authoritative position to decide to adopt which convention, how to moderate it, how to refine it or interpret it, and so on. I must stop here. But the point I'm saying, I'm sorry, but the point is that I don't believe, this is shocking, I'm sure, to all our colleagues up here. I don't believe that there was a single day of enforcement and protection of human rights as such ever. It never happened. Because when the system was established in 1948, the state was made the guardian. Although the state is supposed to be so that's what I mean about the paradox. It's a primary violator and it's a primary protector. And by definition, it can't do that. So that there are problems with the idea of human rights law coming into Kenyan law seamlessly as you seem to have it. I wish, but actually I don't wish, because there are aspects of human rights law which are profoundly problematic. Human rights law is a new colonial ideology. It is not what it claims to be. But the rest of us either had no choice but to accept it, or do not yet realize how problematic it is. Sorry, everybody's took too long. Thank you.
Yeah, those comments were really fantastic. Thank you, Professor An-Naim. Laila, would you like to respond first before we move on to questions?
Yeah, I think that would be best before things get off my mind. But Professor, I think these comments are absolutely brilliant. In just the 13 minutes that you have, discussed this paper with me, I've been able to draw a number of important indicators, for the lack of a better word, that's going to help me now reframe this paper, as you said, restructure it well. And also your perception on human rights is going to help add to my chapter 4, where basically I do discuss a little bit about whether human rights, when incorporated into Kenyan law, still retain their originality as they were discussed at the international level. So I think this communication has been fantastic. So it's interesting how you say that if I want to be able to make the Islamic law argument in my chapter here, I should try and not bring it from a religious angle. Rather, I should just frame it as a legal system in itself, because when I bring in the religion, then comes the complications, as you have explained. There's so many different divisions in Islamic jurisprudence itself. We have different schools of methodology. So how will I justify which one I am picking? So if, for example, Professor, if, for example, I just want to pursue a legal argument with respect to zakat, the legality of it, and I just constrain myself to the Quranic interpretation to say that this particular chapter, Surah Tawbah, I think verse 60, discusses the categories of the people who are the beneficiaries of zakat. And for example, the Shafi school or the Shafi school, jurisprudential school, which is predominant in Kenya, will be the lens from which I will be discussing my perspective. Then would I still have a problem if I want to bring my argument from an Islamic point of view? Because I still believe that it's nice to contribute a little bit of Islamic scholarship into the Kenyan legal system, because these two legal systems have since, even before British colonization, it did exist. But you give me a very nice perspective where you say that Islamic law was just considered as family law. And even before colonization, the Muslims that lived along the Indian Ocean, they applied Sharia based on their own communal welfare. It was a communal aspect. So how do I take a communal aspect as into a national, sphere, right? It's kind of complicated, I do agree. And I do think that it does bring in a little bit of originality to the thesis when I do try and highlight these questions and attempt to discuss them, not authoritatively, because as you said, these are new perceptions and everything is speculation. So I very much agree with you, but just to say that, would it help my thesis? Yes, to continue with the argument to say that in as much as I do agree that if you want to understand Islamic law, take out the religious aspect for it, civic reason, that's where you come in. That's one element. But then if we were to apply the religious element to the state law, what would be the consequences of the Kenyan legal system applying a divine source of law? So I think these two extremes would be helpful for a discussion in the thesis. I don't know if I'm making sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, so we will open it up to questions and perhaps collect a few, and then we'll give Laila some more space to respond if she'd like it. So feel free to either raise your hand or send me a message. I don't know if anyone has a question to get us started. Sheena.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, let me unmute. Hope everyone can hear me. So as I was looking at your paper, one of the things I was wondering about is sort of how you think about this in terms of decentralization in Kenya. So how would we look at the ability of the state to use the Islamic wealth tax to fund healthcare if that was kept locally versus if the central government was holding on to it, and sort of how that would affect perceived legitimacy of the tax collection from the perspective of the citizens paying the tax?
Okay, so as we wait for the others, Shana, that's an excellent question. I was actually wondering if I should be discussing this in my thesis, because it's really, really fundamental. So the Constitution under Article 209 and 210 provides that county governments have the authority to raise their own local taxes or to, impose their own levies and charges. And I was thinking that because the place where I stay, Mombasa, is heavily Muslim influenced, and Mombasa itself is a county. So I was actually thinking that if I was to apply Article 204 to my thesis, then we just, use Mombasa as a case study to say this is a heavily predominant Muslim area. It's a county. Article 29 allows the Mombasa county to impose its own taxes. Then can this narrative of looking into zakat form part of the constitution under Article 209? I was actually thinking these are two nuances I could probably look at. So decentralization may be a fantastic add to a discussion, not particularly in this chapter, but I think earlier in chapter 2, whereby I do go ahead and discuss what the constitution is, a little bit about decentralization. And I think, yes, fiscal decentralization would make my work much more easier in the thesis by confining it to one particular county to now test this out because it's Muslim, it's Islamic, and then we have the zakat. So it might be more acceptable within the Mombasa County than instead of Nairobi County as well. So that's how I'd respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. I think that also just when you think about sort of citizen acceptance of this sort of a tax, if I were Muslim and living in an area where I felt like Muslims were being targeted to pay a tax that would nonetheless benefit non-Muslims, I might feel like this was an unfair tax, that certain citizens were being targeted to pay and not others. Whereas if you have a community where everyone is Muslim, it can feel more, more appropriate to be taxing one group. So that might be something that you could consider also from the legal perspective. Like, what does it mean to tax one group of citizens and not others based on religion, and then have the benefits go to everyone regardless of religion. So I think that would, even in this chapter, sort of enhance the sort of how we think about this applying in a multi-ethnic and multi-religion state such as in Kenya.
Great, thank you. All right, Jenny has a question next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martha, and congratulations for the innovative idea. And I wanted to jump in what Shana just said, because me too, I was thinking that it's unfair that a Muslim is paying some taxes and then all the communities benefiting from the same tax. So I was asking myself whether she can try to see if the tax can benefit counties in Kenya, counties where Muslims are more representative, maybe, and also can see, because as we can look at the Islamic financing, for example, Islamic finance is just focusing on Muslims. So is it possible that she try to do as such as the taxes can benefit for Muslim only, or can be applied in counties where Muslims are more dominant? By the same way, I was trying to look at the poverty structure of Kenya. So maybe the tax can also look at if the tax want to be applied to non-Muslim person, maybe she can target counties where poverty is very high, like a Turkana or Garissa County, where the poverty level is very high because of refugee camps and settlement, which is settled in those counties. Thank you very much.
Tawanda also has a question, so if it's okay with you, Laila, maybe we'll take a few and then we can respond, or as you wish. Tawanda.
Thank you very much.
Tawanda might have frozen for a second. Sufi.
I'm happy to jump in with a very quick question as we wait for Tawanda to unfreeze.
All right, I'll send him a message so he knows.
Okay. So I just want to say quickly, I really enjoyed reading this, not least of all because this is on pretty much every level very far outside of my area of expertise. So I learned a tremendous amount from reading this chapter. And so I really want to thank you for sharing it with us, because I enjoyed reading it and learned a lot. That said, that might sort of contextualize my question, which is perhaps a bit basic, but nonetheless might help you in revision. And it's entirely possible that you do this in an introductory chapter for your thesis. So disregard if this is the case. But if you are thinking about publishing this chapter as like a standalone article, it might help to contextualize a bit the extent to which this is you know, a political issue in the public domain in Kenya. I didn't really get a sense of like, is this something that's, you know, a huge hot button issue that's being written, you know, op-eds are being written about and lots of people care about? Is this something that's important to the Muslim community in Kenya? Is this something that's important to the Christian community in Kenya? I wanted to know a little bit more about what was at stake. How much money are we talking about? What percentage of, you know, the health budget? And this reflects a little bit to Shanna and Jenny's questions about, you know, where is this funding going and how does the tax system work and things like that. So again, it's not getting to some of the more sort of brilliant aspects of your legal arguments, but just some basic setup on how people view this issue in Kenya, and also sort of the scope of the issue or the scope of the problem would be helpful in orienting a reader who doesn't know very much. But again, congratulations on a great chapter.
I have a quick question as well while we wait for Tawanda to hopefully sign back on. Well, I guess I have two. The first one is more of just a comment, in that I found your introduction about what the broader project is about extremely illuminating. And I have to confess, at the start of this chapter, I had some moments where I was like, well, why health? You know, that wasn't as immediately clear to me. So of course, obviously this is a chapter in a bigger piece, and you talk about this elsewhere. But I think it can be helpful, especially in longer pieces, to sort of remind the reader like what's at stake as they get to different chapters, and especially for people who someday might just pick up and read this chapter. So this is super minor, but I think it could be worth sort of recontextualizing in your introduction, like here's where we're at, right? And then sort of moving on. So that's super minor. My sort of more substantive question is, I was struck throughout by some of the comparisons and parallels and contrasts you made with sort of Christian or healthcare and services provided by Christian organizations. So of course I understand your interest is really in sort of Islamic law and that integration, but I wasn't always really sure what to make of these parallels, right? And it seems to me that this could possibly be a really fruitful area to think about sort of the ways in which, you know, religious sponsored projects have been embraced by the state, and to think about sort of in what ways could that work for sort of maybe Islamic sponsored financing of healthcare, or does that mean that it has to be outside of the state apparatus in this sort of faith-based organization model, which of course we like usually associate with Christian organizations. So I don't think you need to belabor that point, but sort of as is, I sort of kept coming back to sort of wonder about sort of, you know, what parallels I should be drawing and sort of what might work and what might not. Yeah, so I will stop there. Looks like Tawanda is back. Let's see if he rejoins us quickly. We can turn it over to him. Tawanda, are you?
I'm back.
All right. If you want to, we can turn it over to you now if you want to ask your question.
Okay, thank you. The first question was about the lenience of state law towards Islamic practices as indicated in the paper. The second question I had is about the whole aspect or idea of legal pluralism that Laila is talking about. Is it more of a methodological approach or a theoretical angle which can assist in understanding what is happening, particularly in the context of Kenya? And I think the third question I have is the whole aspect around taxation of religious organizations in Kenya. Like in some other countries, religious organizations or churches are taxed. Is it the case in Kenya, or what is the situation if it's not the case? I think basically those were my questions. Thank you.
Great. Do you have any interest in responding, Laila, while we wait for more questions? Or if not, we can.
Yeah. So I think Shanna, Eugenie, as well as Natalie, your feedback is more towards the methodological approach that I'm going to be taking in my thesis generally. Now, I do appreciate that this is, you know, it's a very fast draft, and I just wrote it like, you know, because I had so much in my head and I had to put it down quickly, but it does need a lot of thorough restructuring. And obviously the aspect of Shanna, when she talked about the citizen acceptance of this, you know, the Muslims are paying this, but the non-Muslims would be benefiting out of this. Does it have a sort of a discriminatory angle? This ties down to the taxation element of it, because what is the state's approach here? If the state is using the Muslim money to finance healthcare at a national level, then would it be providing the Muslims with tax exemptions or tax credits? We do not know this at the moment. It's not very clear, because zakat currently is not being discussed in Kenya at state level. It's only being discussed among dispersed Muslim groupings. So you have the Muslim community, which is the Punjabis, the Pakistanis, the Bangladeshis, the Arabs. They decide the way they're going to be collecting their zakat and distributing it to their people or outside the country. It's really fragmented. So the idea of citizen acceptance, I think it will be tied in to the entire concept of discussing it from a legal jurisprudential aspect, right? What are the legal norms here? How are the legal norms defined under Islamic law? Does this Kenyan state accept these legal norms if it's to apply them? So the objective of my thesis was to just look at one thing. Can zakat be used to finance the right to health in Kenya? And the reason for choosing the right to health was only because it is so severely underfunded, and it's been underfunded since we got independence. So it is an area that is ripe, and previously, because I've been working a lot with the health organizations, I kind of felt it was the best fit for me to work based on my experience on the health sector. And then being a Muslim, to try and see if we have adequate finances. So there currently isn't any research in Kenya that has documented or has, collected data on how much zakat is paid in the country. I was able to do a little bit of research in Mombasa and a little bit in Nairobi to get some statistics. And it's just, I was only able to interview about 100 people, asking them, how much do you pay? Why do you pay? Who do you pay to? Would you trust the state? And again, the issue of citizen acceptance was at the core. We don't trust the state. We will not want to give our money to the state. First of all, can our money, which is a religious duty, be used to finance healthcare? Secondly, can it be used to provide for the health benefits of non-Muslims as well? These were questions that the Muslim society was even asking me, because it's not very clear. So what I want to do in my thesis is to clarify these questions for them. That number one, is zakat available for financing healthcare? Secondly, can it be used to finance the healthcare of non-Muslims as well? And then thirdly, would it be useful for the state to intervene? Now, obviously, these are questions of legitimacy. So citizen acceptance, the discriminatory aspect, the fact that I need to zero in into a specific county to be able to test this out. So testing it in a predominantly Muslim area would not really benefit my thesis, because I want to get out of the Islamic angle. I want to be able to see whether a secular state can actually adopt Islamic principles in their fiscal budget. So if I was to go back to the Muslim society in Mombasa, it's fairly easy. I know they'll probably want to give their zakat, and then the state, because the county governor is Muslim, the deputy county governor is Muslim, most of the health officials there are Muslims, they would look at zakat as, yeah, a financial contribution for us to provide for healthcare for the Muslims in Mombasa. So where is the how do I put it, the original push that I'm going to give? So I rather look at a county which is heavily non-Muslim, and then try and see what would be the Muslims' perception of their money being applied in this particular county. I think this would generate, good literature, more scholarship, more arguments, more debate. And that's what we want to do. We want to open it up to heavy debate so that we come up with an authoritative position. Like the professor has told us that there's hardly authoritative stand on these issues. So unless we put it out for critical debate, how are we going to get this authoritative stance? So I think it's all about the methodological design, which I'm going to look at. And Natalie, indeed, I must contextualize this if I want to publish this as a standalone paper, because anybody reading it would be like, oh my God, I have so many more questions. So I think the way you've said, I need to bring this out very well, that is it important to the Muslim community, first of all? What is the percentage of the health budget in the country? How does the tax system work? These are issues that I should be able to tackle in this paper if I want to publish it as a standalone, and I intend to. I would definitely edit it better. Martha, yes, you had the same question, why health? That was the first thing that you're asking. But again, I said, because this paper is part of a number of chapters already written, the justifications for this had come earlier on, but I'm privy to the fact that I would have to justify why health in this particular paper if it is supposed to be published as is. So a general overview, as you have suggested, I'll definitely put it in. And it's interesting, you've asked me about, why am I drawing these parallels? I've talked a little bit about the Christian missions that have been providing healthcare since the colonial period. And now I'm talking about the Islamic faith-based organizations which exist. So what am I really drawing out of this? This is something I need to sit down and really think about rather than just put it out there. So I will reflect on this, and I'm going to make a statement on this in my paper much, much later. Twanda, so I was looking at legal pluralism to help me understand what the Kenyan legal system is, how is it structured. So I wasn't looking at it from a theoretical angle, because I believe legal pluralism is more of a methodological tool of inquiry. It helps you understand how the state constructs and deconstructs norms. It helps you understand whether those norms are just legal norms or they're incorporated with societal norms. The theoretical angle that I would be applying is socio-legal positivism. So that's something very separate. Legal pluralism for me is purely methodological. And for your question on the taxation of religious organizations in Kenya, they're not taxed. So all the churches here that collect tithes are not taxed. It's not, our system is not similar to the German system. It's very different. So religious funds that are provided are basically untaxed. So I didn't hear your first question very clearly. So if you may probably repeat it, then I'll be able to answer it. His mic is off.
Oh.
In the paper, you make a claim that state law in Kenya is more lenient towards Islamic law. I wanted to know, why is it the case? Thank you.
Okay, perfect. You see, it's because prior to British colonial rule in Kenya, the Arab population had settled along the coastal strip, which is today's Mombasa, Malindi, and Lamu. And during that time, the Muslims were already applying a form of Sharia. The professor says there was nothing like Islamic law, they were applying Sharia, so I'll use the term Sharia. And because when the British came, they wanted to have control of the coastal strip. So they entered into a negotiation with the Sultan of Oman, who at that time was, the dominant leader of that area. So they signed a treaty. The Sultan of Oman signed a treaty with the British colonial administration. And part of the treaty's condition was that you will allow the Muslims to continue applying the Sharia, which was Muslim personal law, family law. So because of that, when Kenya was negotiating independence, the Prime Minister of Zanzibar, Mr. Shamte, and the founding father of Kenya, President Jomo Kenyatta, they agreed that Jomo Kenyatta would continue the application of Muslim personal law and entrench the Qadi's courts, which are Muslim Islamic courts, into the constitution. So when we say that the state law in Kenya is lenient towards Muslims, it's in recognition of this historical relationship. Because you see, even today, whenever we have elections, the coastal strip is very, very provocative because they always talk about secession. They don't want to be part of mainland Kenya. So in order to make sure that the country is held together homogeneously, the government is very lenient in the sense that they allow the Muslims to apply their Muslim personal law. And right now we're also having Islamic finance, Islamic contracts, Islamic banking, Islamic insurance, Islamic bonds as well. So it's really opening up the market for that. Basically, it's good friendship between the government and the Muslim population. And it's also a political move because it's 11% of the population whose votes that you want.
Great, thank you. All right, we have another question from you, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you very much. As it was asked to discuss or to justify why she is focusing on the health sector, right? I also think that she needs to discuss why she's asking private finance of the health sector. It's like she needs to discuss this is what we call state failure, because it means that the state is not able to finance efficiently the health sector. So she needs also to discuss this clearly in the paper, why she thinks that exogenous or private funds should be used to finance the health sector in Kenya, meaning that the state somehow failed in financing efficiently the health sector. Thank you.
I'm going to interject with another comment quick as well, which I was struck when you were talking about your desire, Laila, to find a case where the Muslim population is not a majority, to sort of get a sense of how they would then sort of, accept this type of system that you're proposing. And I guess I want to just encourage you to think about how you might want to structure a comparison, because it strikes me that you'd want both a high density, high Muslim share of the population that's Muslim and a low Muslim or a lower share of the population that's Muslim, because if you find in an area where there's sort of a lower percent, or it's not Muslim majority, right, that people are skeptical of it, you might assume it's because they're the minority, but it also could be that in a majority area, they're also skeptical. So you mentioned you've already done a bunch of interviews in Mombasa. And so maybe you can use that as sort of the latent comparison, but I would sort of think if you do want to do more interviews, or just think about sort of a case where you would expect people to maybe be more skeptical because they're not in the majority, I would think about something that then looks like a little bit like Mombasa to the extent possible in terms of maybe size and economy or something like this. And access to baseline healthcare, right? Like the quality of the health system, because I think that'll allow you to sort of make a more convincing claim that it's really about the demographics, say, than just something about preferences among Muslims as a whole, right? And I think that that'll give you a lot more leverage. Any other final questions? All right. Well, Laila, you're welcome to respond. You're welcome to sort of say that's enough. Got a lot of feedback.
No, I think Eugenia has given me feedback on how to improve the paper. And Martha, yourself, your recent comments are similar on how to restructure the paper and edit it well, and therefore do a better comparative. So these are feedback that I'm definitely going to take on board, and I'm sure it's going to make the paper be much more illuminating, to use Natalie's word as well. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all your feedback. I'm not a scholar, I'm not an academic. This is very new to me. I'm very scared about this because you don't want to end up doing your viva and you're told, oh, you failed, you know, but I'm trying. And I think these comments have been really lovely and I've benefited most from them. And I promise I'll incorporate them and do my best and let you know how things go from here, should I be able to get this paper published, God willing. And thank you very, very much. I'm really honored.
Wonderful. Well, I don't think anyone's concerned about your failing. I think this is a really rich, interesting project. I want to echo what Natalie said earlier, that I learned a ton from this, as well as from Professor An-Naim's comments, which I also really enjoyed. So thank you to the professor for generously volunteering your time to provide feedback to Laila. Thanks everyone else for your great questions. Our next session is scheduled to start at 10. Because people might sign in at 10, I'm going to propose that we just take a small break until then, so that sort of anyone who's signing in for Al-Haji's session. And of course, you know, this will stay open, so if people think of any last feedback for Laila, they're welcome to give it to her. But if not, maybe we can reconvene and then people can take a little break if they need one.
Would you please convey my apologies to Al-Haji that I am missing his presentation? I'm sorry.
No worries. We thank you for generously sharing an hour of your time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor.
Masalama.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. Leave. Good luck.
So the next session is at 10. Okay.